Welcome to the Next Class 2.0 with host Rob Birdsell, Kent Hickey, and Erin Barisano. Join us as we discuss the latest trends and innovations shaping education.
Hello and welcome to the Next Class. I'm Rob Birdsell, your host, and joined by one of my new co-hosts, Erin Barisano. Dr. Barisano, good to see you. How are you?
Thanks. Good to be here, Rob. Thanks.
And we are joined by two of your most prominent colleagues, superintendents. Father John Belmonte is coming to us live from Venice, Sarasota, Florida, and Dr. Jim Rigg from Miami. Welcome, Jim and John.
Thank you.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
For our listeners, I'm just going to do a brief introduction of our guests. I'll start with Father Belmonte, who I go way back to Marquette University High School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I forget, John, exactly when we met there, 1988 maybe?
1987, I believe it was, Rob.
87, you were a scholastic?
I was just starting out in the Jesuits, yep. Mm-hmm.
And
young and impressionable.
Mm-hmm. And I was a student there. A great group of scholastics. I remember some great scholastics you were living with there at Marquette High and forming us some great men. But my favorite Father Belmonte story is actually going to go to Florida, and he's going to know very quickly where I'm going. So John is kind enough to have invited me a couple of years ago to come down and speak to the leaders of his schools in the Diocese of Venice. And I came down a little early so we could get dinner and enjoy each other. And he told me this Italian restaurant we could go to, and it's great. I could walk and enjoy a beautiful day in February, which we don't have here in Chicago, and got out for a nice walk and got to the restaurant a little early. And I went to the hostess and said, table for two. And it was 6 o'clock, by the way, a little before 6. And she said, we'll have one at 9:30 for you. And I said, that's going to be a problem. And she's like, why? I said, well, I'm meeting a friend here. And she's like, I'm sorry, we're booked until 9:30. There's nothing I can do. She said, well, who are you meeting? I said, well, Father Belmonte. Oh, Father Belmonte, this is Father Belmonte's table. And I give you Father Belmonte's wine. And I'll bring you Father Belmonte's appetizer. Da, 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 da. And it was just, I was stunned. I was like, okay, I think I'm in the right spot.
We managed to have a good time.
I was going to say, that's a mafia connection right there, I think. Right?
It's something like that, yes. Of course, we can't say exactly what it is, Jim, but it's something like that, yeah.
Right, or we just call it the Belmonte effect. Okay.
Mm-hmm. We
So
managed
John,
to have a
we
good
do have
time.
to give a shout out to the restaurant. Please give our listeners, if you're ever in Sarasota, this is the best Italian restaurant in Florida.
Mucca Ballerina, La Mucca Ballerina, run by the Zappaterreno family. Great people, great restaurant, like as if you were in Rome eating a trattoria.
Amazing, especially sitting outside on the sidewalk. And if you can't get a table, just say you're friends with Father Belmonte. So let's move on to Jim. He's like, what is Rob going to say now about me? I remember meeting you. It was not 1987, Jim, but you were a young superintendent in Cincinnati. And we were launching the Drexel Fund, and you were quite generous in introducing us to your schools and to the concept of replicating schools. You then came to Chicago, and we got to spend some good time in Chicago. And then you made the big move to Miami, which leads me to my first subject of the day here. You're both from Chicago, not from, but most recently from Chicago. John from Joliet, Jim from Chicago. You both land in Florida, Miami and Venice. Okay, you got to tell me the difference, besides the weather. And I think we all know the weather, but Chicago's a robust Catholic school system. Great Catholic schools here in Chicago and Joliet. How is it different in Florida?
I'm leaving the explanation to Jim on why he's here.
Well, I remember during my interview for the Archdiocese of Miami, I was in front of a panel of people, and one of the panelists looked at me straight in the eye and said, listen, what do you prefer, cafecito or cafe con leche? And I said to myself, well, I'm not in Chicago anymore. I love Chicago. Chicago is a terrific place for Catholic education. It's not the hot spot for, nice winters, but it's a terrific place for Catholic education. For me, and I think Father Belmonte might agree with me, it's terrific to be in a place where the church and Catholic education is growing. It is one of the main reasons why I wanted to come down here. This is a place where, our challenges are we don't always have enough space.
Wow.
And so we're having to think creatively about how to expand Catholic education to better serve the population, the growing population that's down here. So for me, South Florida represents a confluence of several factors that support the expansion of Catholic education. Everything from demographic changes to diocesan leadership to the wonderful scholarships that we receive from the state. It's really been a terrific place to be, and the coffee is good too. The answer to that question during the panel was I like both, which was very politic, but it was the answer because I like coffee in just about every form.
So tell me a little bit about you mentioned a demographic shift. I'd love to hear just a little more about kind of who is it that makes up this the church in the Miami area.
Sure. So, like I said, we're fortunate to be in a place where the general population is growing and also getting younger.
Okay.
So in the last, several years, and especially during and after the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people move from the north, gringos like me and others who are seeking a really good quality of life in South Florida. We were preceded by my wife's family. Several of them moved down here, which was another incentive to make this move. And then in South Florida, we continue to welcome just wave after wave of immigrant groups from Latin America and the Caribbean, most of whom identify as Catholic. And so I tell people, Miami is kind of like what Chicago was 50 years ago. It's a very immigrant church. It's a growing church, and we're welcoming a lot of new families, acclimating them to South Florida, and also learning more about their cultures and backgrounds. It's really been a terrific experience for me as a gringo, originally from Colorado, to come here and just be exposed to just an array of different cultures. I don't think there is a country in Central or South America or the Caribbean that I haven't met somebody from in my 3 years in the Archdiocese of Miami.
Neat. Now, so, Father, does that is that similar to where you are in Naples?
A little bit different here on the West Coast. We have a lot of people moving down here. I think the statistic in Florida is something like 1,000 people a week move to Florida, and so we're seeing just a tremendous amount of development. You do have people coming from the north to the south. You have people who certainly would have been escaping the north during the pandemic to come down here. And then the development is just staggering on this side of Florida. Thousands of units going in. I mean, it may even have gotten to be too much because we had Tropical Storm Debbie, and one of the issues that's come up is overdevelopment, and if that's related to the flooding that happened, especially in Sarasota County. And so a couple of years ago, Sarasota County had the 5 hottest real estate markets in the United States of America. 1 to 5 out of the top 10, all in Sarasota County, Northport, et cetera, a bunch of places over on this side of Florida. So tremendous development, a lot of people moving from the north to the south. I wouldn't say that it certainly has the immigrant story as well, but the immigrant story here really is east of Interstate I-75, where you have a lot of people moving into that part of Florida to work in the citrus groves and the sugarcane fields. And so we have a lot of that, and we have a school on that side, and that school is 100% immigrant families. And so we do have that going on in the diocese here, but it kind of manifests itself differently than I think Miami does.
Okay.
You guys, for our listeners that aren't familiar with state funding for Catholic schools, can you share what that looks like for someone that doesn't have any idea what that looks like? Somebody in Orange County or Chicago that would be like, wait, you're getting what we used to in Chicago.
Right.
But certainly California and New York, what does this look like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Father Belmonte, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can jump in and then correct any of my mistakes, Jim. I've got, so it's a universal school choice program, which means that a Florida tax credit scholarship is made available to any family in the state of Florida that has school-age children, regardless of their family finances. So no financial limitations placed at all on the families. So anyone who applies for the scholarship gets the scholarship. And that has meant that many people who have wanted to send their children to private schools, and in our case to Catholic schools, can finally do it. And so many stories about families that never thought Catholic education would be possible for their families, finally realizing that dream. And so that's part of what's driving some of the growth. And certainly on the west coast of Florida, we've seen dramatic growth, double-digit growth every year for the past 4 years. And now that we're basically at capacity at all of our schools and beyond capacity at all of our schools, we're still seeing tremendous growth. So it really has been something that I've really never seen in 30 plus years in education. The amount of resources, the changes that it requires in administration, management of the schools, and so forth. It's really just remarkable.
Well, two questions, John. How much is the scholarship?
So it varies by county. There's a formula that the state legislature developed based on family income, county by county. So we have a county in Florida which gets north of $9,000 per family per student, and then we have another county in the diocese here that gets $7,800. And so that's a significant swing, but it's based on the formula that the state legislature set up, and then they calculate that every year. The numbers usually go up year over year, and so if you're receiving $7,800 last year, you might receive $8,200 the next year, and so on. So those numbers do increase year over year, but they're different based on geography.
And so 7,800, 8,000. That's going to cover an elementary school tuition. But what about the high school? What does that look like when the tuition's 15,000? The families cover the remainder, or how does that work?
Correct. So in our cases, yes. So our high school tuition, we have 14 now Catholic high schools. It is covered through the parents, or each of our high schools also operates a needs-based financial aid program that can supplement the scholarship. I should also point out, Father Belmonte is describing the kind of classic FTC, what they call Family Empowerment Economic Opportunity Scholarship. There is a second scholarship which has evolved from scholarships that have been around for years and years, but that apply to students with identified special needs. So if you have a student who has an identified special need, you can also receive a scholarship. And those amounts can be higher than the traditional universal scholarship to support services and tuition and other things related to serving that student in a private school.
And I should say, Rob, if I could jump in, I've really tried to move our schools on the West Coast here to follow what I'm calling a cost to educate model, that we're really just trying to charge families what it actually costs to educate a student in a school, which is really kind of a holy grail for schools, so that we can do that, because just kind of round numbers, if you say that the scholarship is $8,000 and you charge cost to educate, which is usually just under $10,000, then you're really asking families to cover about $1,500 per year, which most families can cover, after having received the state scholarship. And so we moved to that model with almost all of our schools, and it's worked pretty well. Very little kind of problems with families. And then the other benefit is with all this scholarship money, that the parishes can help those families that can't make the $1,500 or $2,000 payment. And so that's worked out well. It means more resources for the schools. And then you're actually seeing how much it costs to educate a student be charged. So it's also very clean and clear for the families.
Yeah. So Jim, question for you, because you described a community that is very diverse ethnically, culturally, and a lot of them from Spanish-speaking countries, from Mexico, South America, Central America. Is there still a barrier to these families enrolling their students in Catholic schools, just because of the cultural understanding? A lot of those countries, Catholic schools are for the wealthy, and so there's kind of this cultural barrier. But I'm curious now with the state scholarships, the universal school choice. What's been your experience with that?
It's interesting. As Rob said, I was superintendent in Chicago before coming down here, and Chicago had a substantial Latino population, mostly Mexican American, with some exception. And we did run into this. The awareness of Catholic education was relatively low. And if you go to Mexico or parts of Central America, oftentimes Catholic schools are only available to the wealthier elite. Whereas in the United States, we have always made the commitment to serve families of all different types of demographic and economic backgrounds. But I have found, Miami, and maybe it's true of all the dioceses in Florida, we're kind of the exception to the rule. Here, awareness seems to be very high. And I think part of it is the scholarships. I think we have done, at least in recent years, a good job of marketing and intentionally reaching out to families. But the archdiocese here has a deep history with a lot of these immigrant groups. So I think back to, the late 50s and 60s with the Castro Revolution. It was the archdiocese that welcomed families in, the Pedro Pan, putting children on, thousands of children on planes and flying them here. When regimes have changed in Haiti, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, when there's been political and cultural turmoil, the archdiocese is typically on the forefront of welcoming those families in. So we become the gateway often to the United States. And I think because there's this fondness relationship with the church that is perhaps somewhat unique to this diocese, I think it opens people's eyes more easily to Catholic education. And then the scholarships in turn and make it affordable. I mean, if you are in a state, and I know unfortunately many states are still there that do not have a needs-based scholarship or a universal scholarship program, it is very difficult economically to serve families from middle and lower income levels. The economic obstacles become severe. And so fortunately, and this was another one of the reasons why I wanted to come down here, we are in a state where the political environment favors parental choice, where we have enabled parents to make a sincere choice for their child's education. Now, I often say this, that, school choice means school choice. So, sometimes people in other states say, well, your schools are growing in a capacity because you've got scholarship programs. Well, it is parental choice. And if our schools were not good schools, parents would not come to us. They would take their money and go to other schools, public schools or other private schools. But they are coming to Catholic education because we're doing a good job of delivering strong academics and faith formation. So like the Diocese of Venice, we've experienced 4 years of consecutive growth. We've picked up over 1,000 kids year over year, each of the years. Wow. This year, we're opening our 4th new school in 3 years. I mean, we've over half of our schools are filled to capacity with waiting lists, and they represent all different types of demographic backgrounds, wealthy and not so wealthy, and different ethnic groups. I mean, again, the church is growing, the schools are growing here, and it's just neat to be part of it. Last thing I'll say, and you didn't go there, but I think this is true of the Diocese of Venice as well. We really are blessed to have an archbishop here who believes in Catholic education and has a mindset of growth. In early conversations with Archbishop Winsky here, he said, listen, I want new schools. I want to grow Catholic education because we have many families that cannot currently get into their school of choice. And so working with an archdiocesan leader who has that philosophy has really been heartening for me as somebody who's dedicated his entire career to Catholic education.
That's great. The mindset of growth. We're going to take a quick break here, hear a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back with more conversation with Dr. Jim Rigg and Father John Belmonte.
Catholic Virtual is a proud sponsor of the Next Class 2.0 and dedicated to supporting Catholic school leaders. Our partner schools turn to us for online teaching solutions that fill teacher openings, expand their catalogs to offer more course choice, and provide options for students an alternative learning experience. Learn more about how we can support you at catholicvirtual.com.
Welcome back. After that long break, Hope you guys are not falling asleep here. I want to come back to two things, Jim. You said one, that they're choosing because we're good. Like, I think that's a really important point that you made. That there's a lot of talk when you take state funding around accountability. I think that's the ultimate accountability. Parents choosing our schools.
Right.
Aren't they the first educators, and aren't they the ones making the choice? And to your point, they could choose a charter school, they could choose another private school, but they're choosing Catholic schools. And that, I just wanted to highlight that, Jim. I think that's such an important point in this discussion. But I wanted to go to a different point around special needs. I also think is a really important discussion in this voucher state funding. There's an amazing network of schools in Ohio. You might be aware of the Julie Billiard schools. Lainey Davis, an amazing school leader. She took it from 1 to 4 schools serving students with special needs because of the state funding. This is such a no-brainer to me. Do you think this, for people in states that don't have state funding, is the place to start, because it's so obvious, it's so beautiful, it's so needed? Just a thought as I heard you talking about special needs, to both of you, to Jim or John, is this an area, someone who's in California, someone who's in New York, like, how do we start this? Is that a place to start?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that perspective. To me, state help for students with identified special needs that may not be served fully in their local public school is a terrific place to start. I do think there is sympathy, and I say this as a dad who has a child with a special need. It is incredibly difficult for parents to find the right school that can properly serve their child. And if you are committed to a particular faith, as we are, to then find a faith-based operator of our own faith that can serve that child. So I often call this a win-win. If there is state support for families with children with identified needs, they can go to the school that they can choose. They're empowered to make that choice. And then the school then receives that revenue, and they can invest it in services to support that student. Now, I'm not a total Pollyanna. I know that many of our Catholic schools are not fully ready to accept students with more profound special needs. But I'm surprised at what we can do. And we're free of a lot of the bureaucracy that affects sometimes public schools and charter schools. I found that with a bit of creativity and flexibility and compassion, you can do a lot to serve those kids. And serving them certainly resonates directly with our Catholic mission. Indeed, I know that the U.S. bishops are at the moment updating their pastoral letter on serving people with disabilities in the church. So this is a priority for our bishops. We have to be available and accessible to any family that wishes to come to us, particularly families who have children who, as the Pope would say, may be kind of on the margins as having special needs. I don't know, that's my point. Father Belmonte, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would say if you're looking for a school that can serve students with a wide array of special needs, come to Sarasota, because we have a school which is entirely special needs students. It's been well established, working well for many years, called St. Mary's Academy in Sarasota. And all of our students receive the scholarship that Jim was talking about before, called Unique Abilities. And we have, many resources available. And so that's been a real big success story for the diocese, and something that the diocese is very proud of. And that school's paired up actually in the same building with our school called St. Martha's. So St. Martha and St. Mary in the same location. And, a lot of nice cross-pollination going on there, and, joint activities between the two schools. But that's a almost full-service special needs school in the diocese here.
Wow. Is that an elementary school, Father?
Yeah, pre-K. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Neat. So we've talked a lot about kind of the opportunities, the blessings of that school choice has brought to the Catholic schools in Florida. What are some of the challenges that you've had to navigate as this thing has unfolded?
Well, I would start just simply by saying that despite the fact that the state scholarship is established for over 20 years, at least when I arrived in the diocese, people said, oh yes, everyone knows about the tax credit scholarship, right? And so, as I would do, well, how do they know? How do they know about the tax credit scholarship? So people told me, so they said, well, we advertise in the parish bulletin. And I said, well, there you have it. Everyone therefore knows about the tax credit scholarship because it's in the parish bulletin. Our work is done. So I didn't just take that as the final answer. So we created a way of communicating with parents across the diocese using the database of the diocese with the support of the bishop here, who established a parish database. So we used parish records. We created email campaigns to send out through a platform called Salesforce. And we send out 1 million text messages and emails every year to families all around the diocese to let them know that there's a scholarship available for them in Catholic schools. And so many great stories of people who didn't realize that Catholic education would be possible for them. And then also some misunderstandings about how the scholarship would come to them, with one mother who got an email message saying that there's an $8,000 scholarship waiting for you at this school, Saint whatever it was. And so she came to the school office and said, this nice priest told me that I've got $8,000 here waiting for me, and I'm here to pick it up. Right. So the school secretary thought, she's got to be talking about the scholarship. So she kind of got to the end of it and said, no, ma'am, we don't have a bag of money waiting for you. It's actually a state scholarship. We'll tell you how it works, et cetera. But some beautiful, beautiful stories of people who, never thought that they would be able to send their children to a Catholic school. And it all works out. And, the story continues with the universal school choice. Because, I don't have the numbers for this year, but last year we were pushing over 95% of our students accepting the scholarship. So,
yeah,
Amazing.
it's all background. Yeah. So to add on, I might identify a couple of additional challenges. Number one, we're running out of space. As I said before, praise be to God, capacity is a challenge for us. And so, there are talks. I mentioned opening new schools. There are talks about continuing to do that work in the years to come. And I'm sure that scholarships are a big part of that. Secondly, the scholarships are from the state. So, while the state of Florida is generally very good to work with, this is ultimately a political program. So, we always get concerns about what happens if the scholarships go away. We always worry about overregulation. That doesn't seem to be happening. But I know of other states where these programs have been so overregulated by the state, perhaps because of political agendas, that they've just become unwieldy and people walk away from them. And there are certainly political forces in the state that do not like these scholarships and look for any opportunity to criticize them, even though I think they've been wildly successful. So we spend a lot of time, Father John and I and the other Catholic superintendents and bishops and others, meeting with lawmakers, making sure that they're aware of the really positive impact this has on families of all different types of background throughout the state. And not just in Catholic schools, but in non-public schools of all different shapes and sizes.
I mean, the really hopeful stories behind this, as Jim's saying, we're at capacity. So I have one school with a wait list of 300 students. I have another school with a wait list of 200 students. I have every school with a wait list. Every school has a budget that's in the black. And this program has been so successful that there ran a story in the Sarasota paper a couple weeks ago that what the paper called a spike in interest in the scholarships, because it's now universal, may result in the public school district having to cut teachers. So getting back to the choice idea and why people choose Catholic schools, why people choose private schools. This was your point before, Rob. When the school is excellent and people have the choice, they can exercise that choice. And that's what we seem to be witnessing here. And, it goes into even seeing, challenges to numbers in in public schools, which goes back to Jim's point about the political nature of this and why people worry about, the plug being pulled on this. It just seems that the state is so over leveraged on this program that it would be almost inconceivable that you draw back from it. And then the other part of this, and this is to kind of paraphrase Cardinal Dolan, we do what the state does with education, with students. We do it for half the price, and we, in almost every case, do it better. And so the state is getting a great deal by having us educate children. And while it's, a well-funded program, funded, to understand, it's funded in part by private corporations that shift their tax credit, their tax liabilities over to the schools, and then the state legislature funds the rest of it through the education budget. So it's well funded, but they're still getting a very good deal because it's less expensive, as I understand it, to educate children in private schools with this program than it is to educate children in public schools. So it's working. It's working for a lot of people.
And if you look back at the history of state funding from the early vouchers in Milwaukee and Cleveland in 88 and 90, there are only two programs that have ever come off the books. In Washington, D.C., it goes on and off depending on who's in office. And then Jim is laughing because the other one is in Chicago, where the only way to get it through. And I said to many people at the beginning of that, this is going to be a mistake. This is hooking them on crack cocaine, because the way Chicago or Illinois had to stay on the books, it had to be voted back on. All the other bills, like your bills, have to be voted off the books. What politician is going to vote millions of their constituents' children who are very happy in education out of that school? And that's why it doesn't happen. And that's why Illinois made a mistake in having it had to be voted back on, because you were dependent on who's going to be in office. We don't know. And unfortunately, the Democrats were in office and they didn't vote it back on, and it expired. So they didn't have to vote it off. They just let it expire and said, I wasn't in Springfield that day. I totally support this. I just couldn't be there that day.
You may be saying this, but I seem to remember that they didn't allow the vote to occur. A little bit of parliamentary procedure happened there in the state legislature in Illinois. So anyway.
Well, and meanwhile, down here, the people have told me, it was before my time down here, but Ron DeSantis, our governor, when he was first elected, it was a very close election. And part of what put him over the edge was minority voters who were receiving scholarships to private schools, especially in South Florida, where the vast majority of our families are Hispanic or Haitian. And that really put Governor DeSantis in office. And he was returned strongly in his reelection, in part because of the success of this program.
And the old saying is that Republicans put voucher programs on the books and Democrats use them. And that's why they don't go off the books, because the users they can't vote them out, or if they will, they'll be put out of office, and they know that. They're smart enough to know that. So you guys, we are coming up on time here. Really appreciate you joining us, one of our early guests in season 5 of the Next Class. As we wrap up every podcast, we ask our guests one question. That is, who is your greatest teacher and why? And while I give you a moment to think about that, Erin and our co-host Kent, for the first time in 5 years, were the first to turn it on. No one ever said, well, Rob, what about you? And of course, Erin and Kent know me well enough. They're like, oh, Rob, what about you? Who's your greatest teacher? And so I got to share this with you because Father Belmonte knows who I said, and that's Father Warren Sazama, a great Jesuit, longtime Market High teacher, counselor, and eventually president, and just an amazing educator. I wouldn't be who I am without Father Sazama's impact on my life. So gave you guys, no one else has ever had that pause, because Kent and Erin, I had to share that with the two of you. Our listeners, you're like, Rob, we heard that last time. But let's start with you, Father Belmonte, your greatest teacher and why.
Yes, well, of course, I would want to mention my parents, but I would say, kind of as a teacher, a wide array of good and holy Jesuits who have taught me over the years, both as a student at Marquette University, at the Gregorian as a seminarian in Rome. And then, of course, all of my formators, and I would mention specifically Father Gene Mers as my novice master when I started in the Jesuits, 2 years, dragging us through all kinds of classes and prayer and the spiritual exercise and everything. Made a lasting impact on my life as a teacher, but also a spiritual director, mentor. And so I'll just say Father Mers, but also give recognition to all the great Jesuits who taught me on both sides of the Atlantic.
That's great. And Jim?
Great.
Well, I'm going to say Father John Belmonte. No, although I have learned a lot from you. I mean, the cop-out answer, of course, is my wife and family that teach me a lot every day and keep me humble. But thinking about my own education, I immediately was drawn to a couple of people. Ironically, a theater teacher, a drama teacher in high school named Wally Larson, who taught me quite a lot about not just theater, but education. And then the first superintendent I served under, Mary McDonald in the Diocese of Memphis, who taught me a heck of a lot about leadership and whose inspiration continues to guide me today.
That's great. And a little preview, Erin and I we mentioned Lanny Davis from the Julie Billiard Schools coming in a few episodes. I forget exactly when, Erin, but that'll be a fun discussion.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Focused on the work that she's doing at the Julie Billiard Schools at JB Way.
Yeah, so needed for our families. So looking forward to exploring that conversation.
Great. Well, thank you guys for being with us. For our listeners, thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed this, please like this podcast, share it with family and friends. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you in the next class.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in.